really want Steph here.
Yeah.
It's one of thing.
Well, it's an amazing panel. It's for me. I hope I can follow this panel, but I'm so thankful, John Brockman, that you brought together these two extraordinary men. John, what made you to do this?
Pressure.
Pressure? DLD pressure?
Pressure.
DLD pressure.
Way to help.
We pushed him so hard.
This is true, actually, yes.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Last year, John brought us John Dawkins, and Richard Dawkins and Craig Venter, and another extraordinary EDGE moment. You know, John is doing edge.org beside many other things, and now he's...
We're ready?
And this panel is a premiere. It has never happened before, this dialogue. So enjoy.
Paging Nassim.
Ah,
Yeah, we're in this. We can start.
great. Thanks. Hi, we have water here, no?
Water right here. Good.
How are you going to sit in the middle?
See that? Think so? Yeah, otherwise. Ready?
Sorry about that.
Picture for Max.
I was expecting more space. I hope I'm not on.
Yeah. Ready? Thank you. Thanks for coming. I'd like to read a couple of sentences written by Nassim Taleb around 2003 to 2004 or 5. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We're starting. Globalization creates interlocking fragility while reducing volatility and giving the appearance of stability. True, we now have fewer failures, but when they occur, I shiver at the thought. The government-sponsored institution Fannie Mae, when I look at its risks, seems to be sitting on a barrel of dynamite, vulnerable to the slightest hiccup, but not to worry. Their large staff of scientists deem these events unlikely. This is from Nassim's quotes and warnings that imbeciles choose to ignore. Nassim is the author of The Black Swan. He's a scholar of extreme events and randomness. And he and Dr. Kahneman, who I'm about to introduce, work together and talk together.
We have lunch.
Lunches together discussing hindsight, biases, the illusion of patterns, perception of risk, and denial. Now, if you've sat in some of the panels here, you'll realize there's a lot of denial going on in Munich, and Davos will be very interested in what these gentlemen have to say. Daniel Kahneman is professor of psychology at Princeton. He's generally acknowledged as the greatest living psychologist, but don't take my word for it. According to Daniel Gilbert, Harvard psychologist and author of Stumbling on Happiness, Danny Kahneman is simply the most distinguished living psychologist in the world, bar none. Trying to say something smart about Danny's contributions to science is like saying something smart about water. It's everywhere, in everything, and a world without it would be a world unimaginably different than this one. Steven Pinker goes a bit further. He says it's not exaggeration to say Kahneman is one of the most influential psychologists in history, certainly the most important psychologist alive today. He's made seminal contributions over a wide range of fields, including social psychology, cognitive science, reasoning and thinking, and behavioral economics, a field he and his partner, Amos Tversky, invented and for which Danny was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. We'll start with Nassim. I will try to stay out of the way, and you'll be able to ask questions before we end.
Yeah, this conversation is a conversation that started in Rome in June of 2004, and we had a problem that we had the best mozzarella ever, no? That you and I had. Okay. And it took a while to find that restaurant. We stumbled upon that restaurant accidentally. So we finally discovered which restaurant it was that had that beautiful mozzarella. But the conversation kept going on now for about, since 2004, on a regular basis. I don't know how many lunches and how many dinners, including a car ride to Maryland, a 4.5-hour car ride in which we got lost. No? So, you know, conversations are not very compatible with driving in strange places. Anyway, so we're synthesizing a long conversation about ideas I initially had on rare events that were puzzling me. Why is it that this problem is staring at us and people are not acknowledging it? Now, what do I mean by the problem of rare events? It's very simple. Rare events are rare. Therefore, you're not going to see them in past history. So you have to invent a story to understand their properties. A 100-year flood is not going to be visible when you have 10 years of data. However, rare events can be massively influential, massively consequential in some domains. Like, for example, in the book publishing business, a few authors make up the bulk of the profits. In pharma, for example, a few drugs represent the bulk of the profits of the entire industry, and you have about 1 million to 2 million hitting the market, okay, and maybe 5 or 6 make up most of the profits. So the rare event is massively consequential in some domains. Now, the banking system was massively exposed to the risk of rare events, and people were making up stories. It was a puzzle to me. It was a puzzle. I mean, I could not figure out what was going on there. Why did people not want to accept that they're taking massive amount of risks? And why were they inventing theories? After I ran into Danny, things got a lot better in my life. My life improved markedly, visibly. I had to rewrite Fooled by Randomness. Nobody noticed. And then I was writing The Black Swan, and sure enough, Danny has a lot of explanations of why is it that people do not understand the role of rare events in society, and why do people take exposures to them? And it's very simple. Society would be a lot better place if we accepted that some events you cannot predict with any precision, let's not take these risks. So that's my point. Should I explain more? That's my point, and then Danny has explanations.
I thought you'd say a little
Sorry?
more. I thought you'd give
I can
me
say a little more. Okay, so what did I discover in Danny's work that can explain to me what was going on with these people taking massive amounts of risks? The first thing was that, and I remember that was in Rome, that day before the mozzarella, before that magic mozzarella, right? Danny came on stage and told the crowd, if you think people take risks because of bravado and because of their remarkable ability to calculate probabilities, you're wrong. He had shown in his work that if people take risks is because they're both ignorant of the odds and cowards. And he shows it, okay? That's the first thing. He shows it with his some experiments he did, in which when you make people aware of these risks, they're so cowardly, they overestimate these risks. One extension of his work done by other psychologists is that people pay more for terrorist insurance than for general insurance that includes terrorism. So he showed effectively that this risk-taking by banks and stuff like that is not born because people are remarkably good at assessing risks. It's simply because they're fooled by them. So I call that, in the Black Swan, people love to cross the street blindfolded. So don't cross the street blindfolded, and worse, do not drive a school bus blindfolded, as Bernanke did. So that's the first element of psychology I found to explain what was going on with the risks we're taking in economic life. Should I say more elements?
Yes.
Okay. And there are a few things I have not. No, we've had a lot of conversation visibly, typically at 12 o'clock sharp, except for once. All right.
You usually say more than this.
People in the back
Sorry?
here.
You
Not
usually
loud
say
enough in
more
the
than
back?
this. Nassim.
Okay, so that's yeah, but I'm a little we're jet lagged and it's early in the
Go
morning.
ahead.
You see, usually we start our conversation much later, you know, in New York
Yeah.
time. The other element that I found in Danny's work to explain this, you see, I'm focused on rare events. When you bet against a rare event, you tend to make small gains steadily, and eventually you blow up. Now, why is it? What's the psychological explanation for that phenomenon? Why do people like to make bets? They make pennies, 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 pennies. In my book, I say that they tend to go to eat like chicken, but when they go to the bathroom, they go to the bathroom like elephants, right? And that's what happens with banks. Why do people accept these kind of payoffs? Well, the first explanation is that they're ignorant about the odds, but the second one was explained in his prospect theory, the beautiful theory that tells you the following. I'd rather make 100 times $1 than make one time $100 any minute. This he calls the convexity of the utility in a positive domain. The profits, you'd rather make a lot of small profits than one big lumpy profit. On the other hand, I'd rather make a huge loss at once rather than incur a lot of small losses. And so utility of negative $100 is a lot higher than 100 times the utility of negative $1. And that he calls the convexity of losses in a negative domain. So this is a second explanation I found in my work coming from Danny. Of course, there are about 28 more, but I'm going to summarize. And this can explain what I call the mechanism of bleed versus blow up. Why do people not, incur small losses to make a bundle? Why do they prefer to make small profits, but that's a loan with a stochastic payoff time, and eventually they're going to lose everything in one block? Why do people accept that payoff? Well, visibly, Wall Street has another problem, is that typically when you lose a lot of money, it's not yours. And as we see now, we have backward capitalism, where it's capitalism for the profits of Wall Streeters, but it's socialism for the losses. In other words, when they make money, it's private. Capitalism, beautiful, private enterprise. But when they lose money, it's our problem, and you're going to open up your wallet now to pay back for their losses, okay? Because they've got their bonuses and they're sitting on a beach, okay? So there is an element, I would call it, of moral hazard involved. But there's also a psychological element because, you know, people sometimes who don't have moral hazard also incur that. The third thing I learned from Danny, but indirectly from your work, is that you cannot trust humans with information. You can't trust someone with information. And of course, he guided me to the literature over these many lunches, dinners, and car rides in which we get lost. But that's, to me, was central. I was waging a war against value at risk, something called value at risk that doesn't work. To me, it's charlatanism, pure charlatanism. It doesn't work. It tells you the risk of rare events, so people calibrate their exposure to it. It doesn't work, but people say, well, we know it doesn't work, but it doesn't cause any harm. What do you mean it doesn't cause any harm? Nonsense. There is harm in giving an idiot, never give a fool sterile information, because he cannot ignore it. And I found that thing in his work when one day you told me, and of course it's in his work, Danny said, if you ask someone for the last 4 digits of his social security number, and ask him to predict or guess the number of dentists in the Manhattan phone book, these numbers will be correlated. If you ask him the questions in reverse, the numbers will not be correlated. So this is another element from his work that identified as why do people use, you know, why are numbers harmful? And later on, I called it the non-neutrality of representation. In other words, don't give anyone a map and tell him the map is wrong, he's going to use it. So these are the 3. Should I stop here?
No,
or you
no, no.
Okay,
Enough.
very good.
Enough.
Thanks.
Nassim is doing something very unusual, I think. I mean, he is best known for being very, very hard on people, and today is being very, very nice to me. And I'm not prepared for that. I was expecting him to be hard on other people. I have a few reflections on the crisis, and many of my thoughts, of course, are influenced by Nassim. It is, I have learned at least as much from him as he has from me. For me, one of the interesting moments in this crisis has been what I call Greenspan's confession. And many people, I think, here are aware of it, that, it is actually quite striking when you see a man his age and after his life experience saying, my theory of the world was wrong, my framework was wrong. And it is interesting to see what was his framework and why was it wrong. And he articulated the framework. He said that he had expected firms, financial firms in particular, to be in the best possible position to protect their interests and to protect their long-term survival. And he had not expected them to engage in what turned out to be essentially suicidal policies. And when you stop to think about this, there are really 2 elements that are very surprising in Greenspan's framework, the one that he would like to give up now. One is really the assumption that agents are fully rational, and there is a lot of evidence clearly that they're not. The other is the idea that firms are actors, that firms are rational agents. But firms are really not actors, and certainly financial firms, as we have learned, are not actors. There are agents making decisions, there are executives making decisions. The interest of those executives and the interest of that abstract idea that we call a firm are clearly not aligned. And if we want to understand why firms are suicidal, it is in part because the agents are behaving, and as Nassim indicated, they are actually quite frequently not committing suicide. So there is a mismatch between firms and the actors who act on their behalf, and the mismatch is in part a mismatch in time scales. For a firm in principle, there is a long horizon. People have a much shorter time scale. They have to have 3 meals a day, a salary every month, a bonus every year if they are in the financial industry. And so their scale of rewards is on a completely different scale than what is in principle the best interest of the corporation. And we must take that into consideration when we think about what they do. But this goes a little deeper, this mismatch of time scales. There is a mismatch at the level of expectations. And here I'll digress just a bit into a bit of technical psychology, but really not too much. Psychologists these days speak very often of 2 systems in the mind, system 1 and system 2, where system 1 is more intuitive and system 2 is more calculating and more reasoning and does. And it turns out that there are some experiments indicating that system 1 and system 2 develop expectations in different ways. And so I almost was looking, I thought of it only last night and I didn't, well, I couldn't have shown a picture anyway, but let me describe an experiment to you. There is an image that I think every one of you has seen. It's a medallion, a round medallion, and there are really 2 faces. They're marked by a mouth and an ear, and one is looking right and the other is looking left. All of you have seen this medallion. And an experimenter, one of my heroes actually, ran an experiment, very simple. He showed people first one medallion looking this way, then the other medallion, then this one again, then this one again. Not the medallion, just the figures, the single figures, the halves of the medallion. And then he showed, and what is typical with that medallion, you only see one face at a time. You look at the medallion and you'll see either the one on the left looking right or the one on the right looking left. And now the question is, what will people see when for the first time they have a conflict? They could see the one looking at the right or they could see the one looking at the left. If they were following what they know, they would alternate. So if the last medallion that they saw was the left one, their left one, they would expect the right one to come on next. This is the rational thing to do. Things have been alternating. This is not what people see. You show them the medallion, they see the thing they just saw. The expectations that we have in our intuitive system are different from the expectation that we have in our reasoning system. And typically, we expect things to repeat themselves. And we develop ideas about living in a new world or in a new regime very, very easily. I remember when I was living in California, if there were 3 years in a row that the rain was, there was little rain, people immediately started feeling that the climate had already changed. It takes about 3 years for people to think that they're in a new regime. This turns out to be very important when you're looking at mass phenomena in the economy, the speed at which people will feel that things will go on forever. They may know that it's a bubble. They may know, but this is like System 2 knowledge. It is not System 1 knowledge. And people do act a great deal on System 1 knowledge. Now, Nassim, I would like you to describe, because that's what I was expecting you in a way to say, why you think that people have trusted models that they shouldn't trust, because that's been your big quarrel with economists, and I would like to defend them a bit, but you need to attack them first.
Okay. I've been since I finished my last book, I've been immersed in the history of knowledge, and then I got stuck in the history of medicine, and simply out of curiosity. I'm not interested in medicine. I'm interested in how people can be fooled by ideas for a long time, not see reality, simply because ideas are bad for you. And here I quote you, Danny. One day you said, ideas cost you money to a crowd. I was present. So ideas are bad for you, what I call rationalism. You start having ideas in your head, and you start framing reality in a way that's not compatible with empirical evidence, and you ignore evidence. So it's called rationalism. It really affected medicine for a long time. For a long time, doctors were killing patients, and the break-even didn't happen until much later than you think. And actually today, even today, I believe that the medical practitioner at the margin kills more than he helps, all right, at the margin, all right, with type 2 error increasing. Anyway, and what was the problem with medicine? Because medicine was theoretical, and there's something about whenever you have ideas, you despise evidence. Whereas practitioners were heuristic-based, had little things. So you had two medicines: the medicine that came from the doctors at Bologna, the Sorbonne, and they were in the business of killing patients. And I mean, if you bleed someone, the idea is to bleed someone, and it was well known that you triple the chance of death, but they did it because that was the thing to do. And then you have the practitioners, bottom up, they knew tricks. They were called charlatans, quacks, but nevertheless, they did cure patients on a balance. I mean, the medicine we have today, clinical medicine, of course, did away with that theoretical. It's a complete new medicine. So I noticed that how can medicine fool people for 14th century? Because all this problem was known by the empiricists of the 3rd, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. Can you fool people for a long time? And that explains to me what's happening in economics. Danny and I are going to Davos today, and you can expect me to be less nice than you're experiencing currently in Davos, because I'm going to not mince words. You got to explain to me why they have a profession that never replicates out of sample. The only person who got a Nobel in economics for something that replicates out of sample is him. The only person, all right? In other words, I can go test here on you his prospect theory, and odds are it will work. I bet my money it will work. Explain to me why these papers never replicate. It's not that they don't replicate.
Why?
Why? Well, I figured out the first reason why is because economics belongs to what I call extremistan. It's dominated by rare events. They don't have stable properties, and anything that affects rare events is not computable from data. And I showed a paper that's coming out in a formal journal, but I put a preview on Edge, in which I put the data. I put 40 years, up to 48 years, whatever I could find, of economic variables. About every single piece of data that exists today for economic variables, I analyzed. In 40 years, for example, of stock market returns, one observation determines 80% of what we call the kurtosis. And the kurtosis is a number that tells you how far away you are from normality. It means everything is marked by sampling error. That's my analytical, anything, so therefore, that is based on econometric or statistical analysis in economics is just entertainment. But you don't need that piece of evidence I put on Edge. It's like a smoking gun. You don't need that. You just look at the data. And again, one of our breakfasts that we had at Danal in 2005, he sent me to Tetlock, to the work of Tetlock, all right? Tetlock, who showed that I'm sort of idealizing that cab drivers probably will have as accurate ability to predict economic events as economists, but they're going to be much more humble. They're not going to wear suits and ties, and then therefore, they're not going to be. And if you take advice from a cab driver, odds are you're not going to take the risks you will take if you take advice from Bernanke's staff. All right. So therefore, I kept looking at the data at economists, and I was shocked. Number one, to realize that it was a profession that even, made claims that it did not have. So it makes, so I kept asking people, explain to me what's the difference with astrology. Astrology sounds rigorous, and they have their own lingo, and they predict the same way. Actually, economists a little worse. Why? When it comes to rare events, they predict worse. Because I look at the data, and the data messes up on rare events. So it's just entertainment. My particular specialty, my war started with something called value at risk. These financial models that try to predict rare events. And visibly, I don't know if you own a TV, at home, or if you have the radio, or if you read papers, but just turn the TV on, and you'll hear about a financial crisis. In my opinion, it came from the underestimation by banks of the risks of rare events. So like a pilot who doesn't know their storms. Okay? And that came from financial models. Visibly, the plane is going to crash. All right? If the pilot doesn't know about storms, because there are storms out there. Now the economics profession was made aware of storms by a lot of thinkers, starting Pareto, Mandelbrot, a lot of people throughout history. But these go in a dustbin. I didn't know about Mandelbrot. I didn't know he existed till I saw him in 2004. Okay? These people don't publish in normal journal. Why? It's not that the financial profession doesn't know, or the financial economics profession, that they are rare events. It's that these are so hard to model, they prefer to ignore them. Exactly like someone, the drunk person looking for his keys in a dark corner, under the light, and you ask him, did you lose your keys here? Say, no, I lost them over there, but I'm looking here because there's light. That's pretty much what they're doing, which is okay. How would you even know that a rare event's about to happen? Your example of Iceland's currency becoming worthless is something no one in Iceland 4 months before I was there had any idea this was going to happen. No, but if you look at exposure of banks, what I started doing progressively, starting in 2003, is in 2003 a journalist walked into my office with a position of Fannie Mae, with a risk report of Fannie Mae. And I looked at the report, and I freaked out. Okay, that was a New York Times journalist, a defector from Fannie Mae, gave him his risk. I freaked out. I said, oh my God, they're going to blow up. So I wanted to say anybody I could, from the doorman to anybody I run into, Fannie Mae is going to blow up. There's fire here, okay, and nobody's seeing it, okay? When I saw it, and then they countered, Fannie Mae countered that they have 15 PhDs. This Taleb guy is an idiot. They have 15 PhDs. We've deemed that these events are unlikely, all right? But Fannie Mae was the only bank or the only financial institution, okay, that had risks that I saw, all right? Mm-hmm. So I started assuming that all other financial institutions are similar. And I told myself, all you need is 2 or 3 like that, and the system got to blow up. It turned out that every single financial institution had these risks. Every single one, pushed by the pressure of an economic system that want you to have steady returns. So financial models abetted, okay, what I call hidden risk-taking. You take a lot of risk on rare events, and then someone, says, oh, we're not taking risk, we're under control, and this Taleb guy, he's an idiot, all right? And look, all right? So, and we have a PhDs, all right? We have 15 PhDs, all right? So I had to go get a PhD so people, listen to me, all right? So let me continue the situation here that people don't realize. So I started making bets that the financial system was going to go to zero. That was my, to me it was clear, that it was going to go zero, it was going to go bust based on that, based on these financial models. The second thing I wanted to say is that where are we going? Perhaps I should say later, because I thought about it. I said the only way society is getting more and more exposed to rare events. Because the data that I had showed more and more what I call kurtosis. In other words, contribution of rare events to the total was increasing, not decreasing. And we're creating financial instruments that were more and more complex. And the system was getting a lot more efficient. So that was let me add one thing here of what we're going. I thought about it. I said, this system got to blow up because anything fragile will break. The system is very fragile. It has to break. Anything that depends on rare events eventually will go bust. And where did I take my intuition from Mother Nature? Mother Nature does not like to be exposed to rare events. Mother Nature built us to be redundant, have redundancies, have insurance. I don't know how many of you have kidneys, or most of you, no, almost all of you, but you usually come with 2 of them, no? Typically. You come with 2 kidneys, two lungs, so you have spare parts. The economic life does not have spare parts. It's too costly for a bank to have spare money on the side. You see? That is what, so the system, the economic system was becoming more and more fragile because capitalism makes you more and more fragile, just like Iceland, till things blow up and break. That's my idea, abetted by financial models.
But now you've seen, and that was mild. I mean, he can be much more severe than Nassim was here. One of the points that really follows is that the models that are used in finance are, Nassim has argued, useless. Is that fair? Or actually very dangerous?
And the people that use the models are less than useless.
I'm not going to discuss the people that use the models. But I would like, actually I am, because I'd like to explain why useless models are actually used, and why, in some sense, it's very difficult to get by without them. And I want to say 2 things about this. One is, think of a weather forecasting system that does a very good job of forecasting weather. So you know in the morning, you check the radio, you know whether to take an umbrella, to take snowshoes. The system works. There's one thing it doesn't do. It doesn't do hurricanes. And you live in a place that occasionally has hurricanes. Will people use it? And the answer is, of course they will, unless they have a system that also does hurricanes. But if hurricanes are very difficult to predict, then people will adopt that model. System 1 that I talked about will trust that model because it's right day after day, until it's wrong, until it fails to predict. And there is a story that is quite famous in organizational psychology. The famous organizational psychologist Carl Weick told it, I think, for the first time in 1982, and last night I Googled it and I found out that he had taken it from somebody else and not given, never mind. But the story is the story, I think it's in the Swiss army, of the Swiss officer who sends a patrol out, and they're caught in a dreadful snowstorm, and 3 days pass and they haven't come back. And eventually they come back, and he had thought that they were dead, that they were lost. And he asked, "What happened to you?" And they said, "Yes, we were lost, but fortunately we had a map, so we came back." And then he looks at the map and he says, "But this is not a map of the Alps. This is a map of the Pyrenees." And they tell him, "Yes, but we had a map." And the point of that story is that, you know, it's been used a lot in the sense-making and so on. The point of that story is that having a useless number or a useless map, we are so built that it does contribute to confidence, and that it does make that very peculiar contribution to people's well-being and to their ability to go on. So when and if we design a better system, and Nassim is working on a book that will have a better system for society, when we have a better system, it will need to accommodate people's needs. It will need to accommodate the needs of System 1, the intuitive system, and it will need to accommodate their need for feeling confident, which in some cases is satisfied by things that are useless.
Yeah, I have actually, I've answered you, Danny, and by some coincidence on the edge piece, is I'm coming up with I mean, I look, if you take, I'm not particularly more intelligent than anybody else I know, But the only difference, I think, is that I like to take my ideas to the limit. So you don't shy. So people tell me, well, how can you forecast better? And I say, no, I want to change the world to make it resistant to forecast errors. So it's the only world I want to live in, and I want my descendants to live in, and I want your descendants to live in, and humanity to live in, is a world that's resistant to what I call black swan. That's the only way you've got to rebuild the world. So you've got to change the world in such a way that it's resistant to hurricane, so you don't give it that. Can you curse here? Or? No. So you don't really care about forecasting hurricanes. You're resistant to them. And that's a world that should start first with nationalization of banks, because you can't trust them with risk-taking. They make huge bets on hurricanes. In that world, then a weather forecaster, okay, can be trusted, because so what? The error is inconsequential if he makes an error. So that's the idea, is not to try to improve our forecasting method, to change the world, to only live in a world. But I think that I don't have to make much, to do a lot of proselyting there. The world is going to break and establish itself in a way that resists forecast error. And if you look at history, we have had crises in the past. Debt, for example, doesn't allow you to make a forecasting error. So debt should disappear. And in fact, it is disappearing. Lenders are no longer lending, and borrowers are bust. So debt is disappearing as we can watch it.
You call this an Islamic style of...
It's not Islamic. It is not Islamic. If you go back to Babylon, very unstable. Debt is very unstable. You have cycles of debt cancellations. And Julius Caesar had to fight wars to pay back his debt. Both Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the three ancient Mediterranean monotheistic religions, did not like debt. And of course, in Newark, we found that quote in the Bible: neither borrower nor lender. Okay, so you should be. So we have this. The ancient world did not like debt, and debt started rising after the Reformation, I think. And a lot of the growth we've had today came from debt. Now, debt makes you a lot more vulnerable to forecasting error. At the same time, let's not forget what's going on in the world. That's the reason we have DLD. The world's getting more complex. It's one layer of complexity introduced by the internet that makes the world a lot more fragile. So you have to defragilize the world. We cannot fight the internet. We have to find the financial instrument. And let me give you the intuition. In the past, I don't know how many of you partook of a run on the bank, but usually you have to wake up, put your shower, put your jacket on, go, take a bus, wait in line, okay? And then maybe you get your money at 4 o'clock or the next day. Today, how did the runs on a bank take place? You know how they take place? There's this device called BlackBerry, and you can go and bankrupt Iceland in a few minutes. Okay? So you can no longer afford to make mistakes. In the past, we could. So the system is too fragile and was fragilized further by Bernanke and Greenspan, by their policies of making banks gigantic bureaucratic firms. And there's one thing I would like to mention, is that don't think that regulators are particularly intelligent. Okay? Regulators help banks take hidden risks, particularly with the value at risk. So what we should, be doing is not encourage this, because we're facing complexity. We should have simplicity with the financial instruments to counter this complexity, because the world's getting more complex.
I think when you're designing this brave new world, some of the problems that you are going to encounter, or that this brave new world is going to encounter, is the mismatch of time scales between the individual and society, and the fact that in the short run, the person who does not invest in hurricane protection is going to be richer, and if hurricane protection is very expensive, very much richer than the person who does invest in hurricane protection. So how to set up when people are built, as we know they are built, so that they're very present-oriented, their system of expectations intuitively begins to feel safe after a very short time, what are the institutions that we have to build in order to prevent the fragility? That is, that's a problem that you'll have to struggle with.
Right,
No,
and if you nationalize the banks.
But I have an answer for it. I have a very simple answer. My point is as follows. Banks cannot be entrusted with risk-taking because I pay the bills when they lose money. And the two gentlemen, I will not name because you don't want me to name names, the head of a certain firm pocketed $115 million, a former government official, $115 million in bonuses, and left. He was a hero. And the government now has to bail out that bank, okay? The only smart people were the Swiss. They clawed back the bonuses of the heads of UBS. They said, give us back your past bonuses. You were fooling us with your risk-taking, okay? But, so the banks cannot be entrusted with risk-taking because of this asymmetry, okay? So what you have is nationalized banks and then have freedom for some people to take all the risks they want, provided they do not endanger the system. In other words, I don't have to bail them out. So there's something called hedge fund. Hedge funds should be able to take all the risks they want, but we should make sure society will never bail them out. If they go bust, that's okay. It'd be a nice newspaper article and a lot of entertainment for the Schadenfreude for the enemies, but no society involvement in that. So we should have a two-tier system because a bank is a utility. Why are we bailing banks out? Because when I come to Munich from New York, I would like to be able to access my checking account. So it's a utility. It's like having the right to have water in your house, okay? It's like having an army. That is one problem. The other thing is, Danny, there's a problem here that I don't quite understand, which is domain separation. If a corporation is uninsured for losses, say it's going to make $2 per share. If it's insured against black swans, it's going to make $1.80 per share. So it's going to make less than a competitor. And the idiotic analyst at some investment bank will say, oh, this guy's inferior to that one. And then eventually, over the long run, the one making $2 a share is going to lose $200, go bust. The other one will be around, okay? So there is some evolutionary element there. But there's one big question in domain, and that's, again, happened in Rome 2004. I was wondering, why was it that people would buy a house, spend $1 million for a house, so their house is worth $1 million, and their portfolio is worth $1 million, okay? Why do they buy insurance on the house and they don't think for a second? How many of you do not drive a car or have a house without insurance? Okay. One, all right. Okay, self-insured, all right. How many, okay, now how many, this very same person would have a portfolio of $1 million and not insure the portfolio, say it's too costly, it will lower my return. So explain that inconsistency. Explain the inconsistency of society paying between 1% and 7% of GDP, depends on the time, in war, in defense. That's insurance, okay? And you don't pay that, okay, to insure against stock market losses, you see? So there is an inconsistency there that I noticed, and I noticed from a friend, someone who blew up, of course. Eventually, all these people who don't have insurance will blow up, particularly in a complex world. A person, he keeps selling out-of-the-money options for a living. And the person had, before he got poor, an $8 million house. He was overpaying for insurance on his house, but he was selling insurance on the other hand. So there's this domain, what I call domain, that I wrote about in the Black Swan. I noticed that domain is like people going to the health club. They take the escalator to go to the Stairmasters, all right? These are two different things for them, all right? So perhaps for us, it's a matter of explaining to society that just like you have insurance, you should spend money insuring your portfolio, or make less money, or companies should spend money insuring themselves by having more redundancies and things like that.
Okay, in the U.S., a new Secretary of the Treasury was confirmed yesterday. What would you explain to him? And what psychological tasks would you put before him that he should be considering?
I still think there is a big difficulty in implementing. I mean, if you nationalize, this is another story, and then the question becomes, you know,
Who's running the show?
who is running the show, how much you trust them, and the loopholes, and how many people are going to try to exploit it. If you don't nationalize, it is really what I was talking about earlier, the conflict between short-term and long-term, and that the scale of interest of the people who are managing the organizations and the scale of interest of the organizations are very different. Because the people that you're accusing, whose names you're going to name in Davos, they remain very rich. I mean, their institutions blew up, but they are doing very well. And in some sense, it's hard to accuse them of irrationality. I mean, it's not because it's a built-in conflict of interest.
Paying for you're all subsidizing them.
There's some of them are here.
Sorry?
Some of these people are here.
Okay, it's okay. The rest, those of you who didn't accumulate, no, you're subsidizing them, right? Taxpayers, anybody paying taxes is today subsidizing people who own, I mean, have net worths of 100, 200, 300 million euros, but net have gamed the system.
So what are you going to tell the people in Davos in terms of what they should do, not a critique of what they've done? What's next?
I mean, what we should do is, first of all, I don't want what I was saying about 3 months ago, when they started, you know, this business of nationalizing the bank is an emergency, and let me tell you why. You know that the bailout we gave the banks, guess what the banks did with it? Guess what they did with it? Two things. No. First of all, they paid their bonuses. Their employees, they say, oh, they're key employees, we need them. They can go elsewhere, we need key employees. So you overpay someone $4 million, $5 million bonuses. I have friends who got $4 or $5 million bonuses. What, down from 8, but still decent, all right? And the second thing they did, and it's in the papers now, the big scandal at a certain investment bank, is they took massive amount of risk. They doubled up. It's not their money. What do you do when you're underwater? You double up. They increase the risks. So continue. So this, we don't know what, you know, we don't know what. I don't like this situation, Danny. I do not like the situation. I did not like it before. I don't like it now. And I think we have enough evidence of these people misusing the funds. This is why I want to clean. I don't like the semi-government. Profits are theirs. Losses are ours. And this is continuing. And now, not only that, but we're subsidizing them to pay for their mansions, all right? So this is why I want to clean nationalization right away, all right? That's the first thing I say. Tomorrow morning, I want these banks to be nationalized, every single person fired. The second point, and maybe you're not going to like it, Danny, or I don't like governments. I distrust government officials. I think that the people who crashed the plane, the pilot who crashed the plane, they're still flying the plane. I want anybody involved in what is so-called great moderation, when banks were taking a lot of risk, central bankers were saying, oh, it's a great moderation. Their system one was speaking to them, and then they were inventing theories. So there's a gentleman, a Princeton professor, who later on had a promotion, right, as chairman of the Federal Reserve, who wrote a paper saying it's a great moderation. The world is becoming a more rational place, which is bullshit, right? So I want these people out tomorrow, not today, not tomorrow. I want them out, okay? And they're helping their friends. That's the second thing I want. The third thing, and here I'm going to say it, there's an organization. Today I'm here because I canceled a lecture I was supposed to give in Copenhagen for an organization affiliated with a degree called CFA to become financial officer. These people teach portfolio theory, like business schools teach portfolio theory, and they haven't changed. They teach portfolio theory. All this crap that got us here, they teach it to their people. I told them, listen, I gave you a lecture in front of 3,800 of your members in Vancouver, warning you about these methods, okay? I would like you to suspend teaching now. I'm not telling you to change your curriculum, but when the plane crashes, responsible airline companies, what do? They ground their fleet. When there was a Tylenol killing people, what did they do? They withdrew everything from the market to investigate. First you stop, and then you investigate. They did not like my suggestion. So, of course, I told them, okay, find someone else to lecture you, okay, and I'm going to DLD, all right? So I would like business schools tomorrow morning to stop. I'm calling for a boycott for any business school that teaches portfolio theory without stopping, because business school curriculums have not changed. They still teach you things that don't work. And as if they say, well, you know, what are we going to teach the students? We got nothing else to teach them. Nothing. That's one thing I learned. Nothing is better than something bad.
So,
and that's
all
right.
I mean, you're describing business schools as giving students a map of the Pyrenees, basically, and when they're going to be in the Alps. But it may turn out that, you know, they want that map. That's one thing. And the other, and you are, I think, giving them a system for forecasting the weather that doesn't do hurricanes, but that does most of the time. So there is a short-term appeal to what you want them to give up. And you have a problem there, I think, in trying to convince people to give something up without giving them a fairly specific alternative.
Let me tell you, I've been investigating this from the history of medicine. For a long time, people will just hurt the patient simply because they wanted to do something. And I discovered, and I make that claim, and I can back it up, that the reason religion worked in the ancient world was because anything that took you away from the doctor prolonged your life. So if you go to the temple of Apollo, anything that takes you away from that illusion of control, all right, you want to have to do something, prolong your life, okay? And effectively, in America, there's some, you know that it took a long time to understand the notion of iatrogenics. Iatrogenics is the healer causing harm. They don't, I mean, we have to study. I can only give you a drug now if I'm certain that it outperforms nothing. So business school should only teach something if it outperforms nothing. And it doesn't sink in, just like in the history of medicine, it took a long time. And effectively, people like me who were accusing, at the time, the doctors who were accusing other doctors, they say, well, do nothing to the patient because what you're doing is harming him. Bleeding him is increasing the probability of death, all right? They were accused of one thing that's called therapeutic nihilism, okay? So in other words, if you're killing patients, it was better than doing nothing, okay? And now you have to explain business schools. So the only solution is not to wait for business schools to change their curriculum. What you have to do is discredit them. And they're sensitive to that. Hopefully, the cuts in funding coming from the recession, I think the recession is going to be vastly worse. Vastly worse than you think.
Nassim was on television with Mandelbrot saying the times of the worst trial.
No, that was in September.
September, saying
yeah, but people don't know it's September.
The worst trial for America since the revolution. Our time is over, unless questions? Good? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Danny.